What's up, guys? Michael Corsentino for BehindTheShutter.com and Shutter Magazine with my September 2019 lighting tutorial. This month, I'm going to share with you my 3 favorite techniques for creating soft light. And we're looking here at 3 images that were all created using the techniques that we're going to talk about, from simple to complex, from one light to multiple lights. They all have the same thing in common, which is very soft, beautiful light. So let's start with a definition. What do we mean by soft light? If you look at all of these images, each of these 3 images, they have very similar characteristics in the way that the shadows transition from shadow to highlight. Okay? That's what we mean by soft light. You have 2 basic qualities of light when you're talking about light. You have hard light and soft light. And with soft light, the hallmark of soft light is that the shadows transition into the highlights and vice versa very gradually. Hence, a very soft transition. Hence the name soft light. Lower contrast, beautiful light, soft light. As opposed to hard light, where the shadows and highlights transition very rapidly, and the edges of the light are very sharp and harsh, and the images are more contrasty, so very different light. And we're going to look at that next month. But now let's focus on soft light. All right, so let's start with our first technique. This first setup is a one light setup, one light technique. So basically, you don't need a lot of equipment. You need the right equipment, but you don't need a lot of equipment in order to create beautiful soft light. And one of the best one light modifiers that I know for creating soft light is the Elinchrom 74-inch Octabank. They have a new version of it out now. What's really unique about this modifier is not only its size, but the fact that the light orientation inside faces away from the subject. It faces into the box, into the Octabank, and then the light reflects back out through the various levels of diffusion fabric that are in there. So it creates a very soft light just by virtue of that. Also the size. So you're going to see one thing that's going to follow throughout all of these techniques. There are certain principles which apply to creating soft light, and one of those is the size of the source. The larger the source, the softer the light. Now that can be either physical size or perceived size. What do I mean by that? I mean that the closer the object is, the closer the light source is to the subject, the larger its perceived size. In other words, if we take a medium-sized Octabank, and we move it really, really close to the subject, its perceived size is larger than if we take that same modifier and we move it 10 feet back. Then its perceived size is very small. So you have 2 ways to achieve it. Ideally, you want a really large modifier. In this case, the 74-inch Octabank is massive. It's perfect. I'm using one light and a V-flat for fill on the opposite side of the model, on the shadow side of the model, and you can see it creates a really gorgeous light. Right? Now I can use that for this portrait like you're seeing here, and I can also use it for full figure. And here you're seeing a BTS shot, a behind the scenes shot, so you can see exactly how everything was oriented. Now one of the things to also mention is that you can see the orientation of the softbox. In addition to being a 90-degree angle to the subject, you can see that it is also in front of the subject. So I'm doing 2 things here. By positioning the softbox at that angle, I'm allowing the light to rake across my model. And by positioning it in front of the model, I'm allowing the subject to be in what is known as the feathered part of the light. Okay, this is called feathering. So you're working with the softest part of the light. With a softbox, or an Octabank in this case, you have a hot spot in the center. No matter what you do, there's always a kind of a larger concentration of light in the center of the softbox. So one of the ways to mitigate that is to move the box further in front of your subject and allow the softest part of the light to illuminate the subject. Okay, so that's what we're doing here, and you can see that also in our BTS shot. So very simple setup, but you can see how for either a portrait or a full figure, it creates a gorgeous soft light. All right, so that's technique number 1. Technique number 2 illustrates our perceived size technique, our perceived size concept. Here again, we're using a one light setup. Now I'm using a 22-inch Mola Demi Beauty Dish, which has a white interior, and I'm broadening its size by throwing a 3x3 scrim in front of it. diffusion panel, okay? I'm also added, the Beauty Dish has a sock, it's a diffusion panel on there, as well as a few sheets of ND gel, because as I had my light powered all the way down, but it was still too bright. So that's a way to cut some of the light and soften it, reduce its illumination. And that, so basically what I'm doing is, again, I'm positioning the light source really, really close to the model. You can see here that it's very close to the subject, as close as I can possibly get it. That's really the rule of thumb. With any of this soft light stuff, you want the modifier as close to the subject as possible, just outside the frame, in order to create the softest light possible. Essentially, we're doing the same thing that we did with our last setup. I've got a fill card, a V-flat, again, in this case, a white V-flat on the opposite side of the light, opposite the key light, to fill in the shadow side of the model. I'm using a black background now. Again, I've just taken a V-flat and turned it around and used the black side. I've got a reflector underneath to pop in a little light back up into our model's our subject eye sockets and under the chin, if need be. And we've got a gorgeous soft light. It's another way, so basically what we're doing is we're able to repurpose the light. Like, we're not using a 74-inch Octabank for this, we're using a 22-inch Beauty Dish, but we're able to really kind of change its characteristic by modifying it and by throwing that diffusion scrim in front of it. So we're able to broaden it by using that 3x3. And there's about a foot of space between the two. So just by throwing that 3x3 diffusion panel in front of it, we're able to really broaden it and, again, add more softness to it than it would have on its own. All right, and I believe that I have a BTS for you guys. There we go. And you can see another shot that was created using that setup. And I did not use that second light that you're seeing there pointed toward the background. That was just there for a test, and I didn't like the way it looked, so I turned it off. All right, that is technique number 2. Technique number 3 is a twofer. Both of them use an 8x8 scrim. Okay, this is a really large diffusion panel, all right? The first technique, the one that we're looking at here, and this is one of my favorite techniques, is creates a really gorgeous, natural-looking window light kind of light. And I'm doing that using almost the same technique, the same method as that first softbox, that Octabank that I showed you, which had an indirect orientation to the light. Because what I'm doing here is I'm using 4 strobes, okay? They're stacked one on top of another. They're 2 and 2, stacked one on top of another, and they are fired into a box of V-flats. You can see here that I've created a 3-sided box that I'm firing these strobes into, 2 in each corner, and those are bouncing back, and they are hitting the diffusion panel and creating this really beautiful diffused light that just washes across the subject and creates this very, very soft, natural kind of editorial window light looking light. Gorgeous. It requires a bunch of lights and a big scrim, but you know, if you have that equipment, this is just a beautiful light. And here are a few additional images created using that setup and that technique. Now, I want to show you another way using much less gear. The next version of our twofer just uses the sun and that 8x8 scrim. Okay. Now, I get a lot of pushback on this because this is not an inexpensive piece of equipment. However, if you don't have an 8x8 scrim, that is a manufactured, commercially available scrim, you can make one. That's what I did when I started out. You can use PVC piping. You can get fabric from a fabric store that is diffusion fabric. I've seen people use shower curtains, you know, that have that let some of the light through. So there's always a way. But the main point is create as large a source as you can and place that source really close. So here we're diffusing really harsh midday sunlight, and we're able to create a really beautiful soft light on location just by throwing a big scrim in front of that light, and we've got a really gorgeous light. And I think I have another shot here for you of 2 people rather than 1. So there you go. That is soft light, my 3 favorite techniques for soft light. Try one, try them all, have fun with it, and I will see you next month here at BehindTheShutter.com and Shutter Magazine.